Welcome to Algebra 1, Unit 7, Lesson 15 Practice Problems. We're going to start with 4 vocabulary terms so that we understand what they mean when we see them in the practice problems. The first vocabulary term is completing the square. Completing the square in a quadratic expression means transforming it into the form a times the quantity of x plus p squared minus q, where a, p, and q are constants. Completing the square in a quadratic equation means transforming into the form a times the quantity of x plus p squared equals q. The second vocabulary term is irrational number. An irrational number is a number that is not rational. That is, it cannot be expressed as a positive or negative fraction, or zero. The third vocabulary term is perfect square. A perfect square is an expression that is something times itself. Usually, we are interested in situations where the something is a rational number or an expression with rational coefficients. And the fourth vocabulary term is rational number. A rational number is a fraction, or the opposite of a fraction. Remember that a fraction is a point on the number line that you can get by dividing the unit interval into b equal parts and finding the point that is a of them away from 0. We can always write a fraction in the form a over b, where a and b are whole numbers, with b not equal to 0. But there are other ways to write them. For example, 0.7 is a fraction because it is the point on the number line you get by dividing the unit interval into 10 equal parts and finding the point that is 7 of those parts away from 0. We can also write this number as 7 over 10. The numbers 3, negative 3 over 4, and 6.7 are all rational numbers. The numbers pi and negative square root of 2 are not rational numbers because they cannot be written as fractions or their opposites. In our first practice problem, they want us to solve each equation and write the solutions using the plus-minus notation. And what they mean is, for number 1, we have x squared equals 144. So we would take the square root of both sides, and this would become x equals plus or minus 12. In number 2, we have x squared equals 5. So again, we're going to take the square root of both sides, and this becomes x equals plus or minus the square root of 5. In number 3, we would divide both sides by 4. So this would become x squared equals 7. Then we would take the square root of both sides, and this would become x equals plus or minus the square root of 7. On number 4, we have x squared equals 25 over 4. We'll take the square root of both sides, And this gives us x equals plus or minus 5/2. Number 5. The first thing we would need to do is divide both sides by 2. So this would become x squared equals 11. Now we would take the square root of both sides and we know that x would equal plus or minus the square root of 11. And finally, number 6, we would divide both sides by 7. So x squared equals 16/7. Now we would take the square root of both sides, and we know that x would equal plus or minus 4 over the square root of 7. If you have any questions about how to solve any of these problems using the plus minus notation, please ask for clarification now before we move on to the next practice problem. Top of page 2. Match each expression to an equivalent expression. So, when we look at choice A, we have 4 plus or minus 1. Well, 4 plus 1 would be 5, and 4 minus 1 would be 3. So A matches choice 4. B gives us 10 plus or minus the square root of 2, or square root of 4, which is plus or minus 2. So 10 plus 2 would be 12, and 10 minus 2 would be 8. So B matches number 3. Choice C, we have negative 6 plus or minus 11. Well, negative 6 plus 11 would be positive 5, and negative 6 minus 11 would be negative 17. So C matches number 1. Choice D, we have 4 plus or minus the square root of 10. So that would give us 4 plus the square root of 10 and 4 minus the square root of 10. So D would match number 5. And finally, we have the square root of 16 plus or minus the square root of 2. That would be 4 plus the square root of 2 and 4 minus the square root of 2. So E matches choice 2. If you have any questions about how to solve practice problems such as this, please ask for clarification now so that you are better prepared as we move on to the next practice problem. Next practice question. Number 1. Is the square root of 4 a positive or negative number? Explain your reason. So this might be a little confusing at first, but by convention, meaning it's customary. Square root of 4 is positive. The negative would be negative square root of 4. Number 2, same thing. Is the square root of 5 a positive or negative number? Explain your reasoning. Again, by convention or by mathematical custom or rule, we would say that the square root of 5 is positive and the negative version would be written negative square root of 5. And then number 3 asks us to explain the difference between the square root of 9 and the solutions to x squared equals 9. So the way that we interpret this is that the square root of 9 is positive, so it equals 3. X squared equals 9 has 2 answers for x, so it would be both negative 3 and positive 3. So I know this might be a little confusing, wondering why sometimes we say it's one and sometimes we say it's the other. But if we are saying the square root symbol with a number under it, we conventionally think of that as being the positive root. If we want the negative root, then we would say negative square root of that number. And if we want both of them, we would put the plus minus in front of the square root symbol so that we get both of them. But when it comes to actually seeing the equation, x squared equals 9, well, now both of the numbers, the positive and the negative version, could be substituted for x, and it would make the equation true. So it's the difference between whether we're putting a number under the square root symbol or whether we have an equation that we're solving. If you have more questions on this, please ask for clarification so that you are better prepared as we move on to the next practice problem. So our last practice problem for lesson 15. Technology required, meaning we're going to use the Desmos calculator on part of this. For each equation, find the exact solutions by completing the square and the approximate solutions by graphing. Then verify that the solutions found using the two methods are close. So first step in completing the square is to move the c term to the other side. This gives us x squared plus 10x equals negative 8. Now we take the b term which is 10, and we divide it by 2, which gives us 5. So our factored form is going to be x plus 5 squared. Now we take that 5 and we square it, which tells us to add 25 to both sides. Negative 8 plus 25 is 17. Next, we take the square root of both sides, and our answers are that x plus 5 equals the square root of 17, or x plus 5 equals negative square root of 17. We subtract 5 from both sides, and this tells us our answer is negative 5 plus the square root of 17, which equals negative 0.88, or x equals negative 5 minus the square root of 17, which equals negative 9.12. On the next equation, the very first thing again is to move the c term to the other side, this time by adding 11 to both sides. That'll give us x squared minus 4x equals 11. We take the b term, which is negative 4, and we divide it by 2, which gives us negative 2. So our factored form is going to be x minus 2 squared. Now we're going to square negative 2, which is 4. So we add 4 to both sides, and we get x minus 2 squared equals 15. Now we're going to take the square root of both sides, and that gives us x minus 2 equals the positive square root of 15, or x minus 2 equals negative square root of 15. We add 2 to both sides on both equations, and we get x equals 2 plus the square root of 15, which equals 5.87. Or x equals 2 minus the square root of 15, which equals negative 1.87. So now that we have the exact solutions by completing the square, we want to get the approximate solutions with graphing. So on Desmos, we have x squared plus 10x plus 8 equals 0. And we see that we have one answer at negative 9.12, which matches this answer here. And we have another answer at negative 0.88, which matches this answer right here. So we got the correct answer by completing the square, and we verified it by graphing with the Desmos calculator. Now we'll look at the other one. We have x squared minus 4x minus 11 equals 0. We have one answer at negative 1.87, which matches the second answer we got. And our other answer is at positive 5.87, which matches the first answer we got by completing the square. If you have any questions about how to use completing the square to solve quadratic equations, please ask for further clarification before we move on to lesson 16.